It began with a single sound, one he couldn't explain, and one he would never forget. A metallic click, somewhere in the dark corridor of a sleeping building. It echoed once, then vanished, like a whisper swallowed by the walls. The night janitor paused his cart. The building was supposed to be empty. Only the humming of air vents and the low buzz of electricity filled the air. But this sound, it had weight, intention, almost as if the building itself had exhaled. For 17 years he had walked these same halls, mopping, polishing, cleaning, invisible. He knew the rhythm of every floor tile, the flicker of every light, the hum of every machine. But tonight felt different. The air was colder, heavier, like it carried a secret. If you enjoy dark stories that stay with you long after they end, subscribe, because tonight's story will make you think twice before turning off the lights. Now, let's go back to where it all started. The janitor worked at a high-rise that gleamed over the city like a monument to control. Every morning its mirrored walls reflected the sunrise, and every night they reflected nothing, only black glass and silence. No one remembered his name. They called him the janitor. Sometimes not even that. He moved through the corridors like smoke, a figure too quiet to notice. But he noticed everything. He had seen the rise and fall of employees. He had cleaned the same desk after 4 different managers were fired from it. He knew which executives stayed late, which ones drank too much, and which ones had meetings that were never listed on the schedule. Still, he said nothing. That was his way. Silence was safer than truth. But even silence can become heavy when it's filled with secrets. Each night, as he cleaned the upper floors, he passed by the CEO's office, the one with the frosted glass and the gold handle. No one entered there after hours. The company had strict rules. That door was off-limits. Yet sometimes, as he passed by, he felt a faint vibration through the floor, like machinery buried beneath the surface. One night, while the clock struck 2, he noticed something unusual. A soft glow beneath the CEO's door. Golden. Flickering. Alive. He froze. The rest of the building was in darkness. Only that office, high above the empty city, pulsed with light. He leaned closer. The sound returned, a slow, rhythmic clicking, like a key turning again and again, though no one was there to turn it. A low whisper followed, almost inaudible. It didn't sound like one person. It sounded like many. He stepped back, his heart hammering in his chest. Then the light went out. The building fell silent again. He could have forgotten it. He could have walked away, told himself it was just a trick of the mind. But something inside him refused. He needed to know what was behind that door. The next day, laughter followed him. 2 office workers whispered by the elevators, smirking. "Hey, did you hear? The janitor tried to peek into the CEO's office last night." They laughed. "He probably thinks he's part of the board now." He said nothing, as always. But that night, when the lights dimmed and the city fell into its usual sleep, he returned to the top floor. The hallway stretched long and empty. The floor glistened like black glass beneath his feet. The CEO's door stood at the end, still, perfect, untouched. He stopped in front of it. His reflection shimmered on the frosted glass. He raised a trembling hand and touched the handle. It was warm. He pulled back quickly, his heart racing. Then something slid under the door, a small metallic glint that caught the dim light. He crouched and picked it up. A key. Old, heavy, brass. The kind no one used anymore. On its tag, a single phrase was engraved, "Authorized access." He turned it over in his hand, confused. No one had been in the hallway. No one had dropped it. It was simply there, waiting. He slipped the key into his pocket, unaware that by doing so, he had already opened a door. Not the one in front of him, but one far deeper and far darker. The laughter during the day was louder than usual. It stuck to the walls like dust, clinging to him as he pushed his cart past open-plan desks and empty coffee cups. They joked about the janitor with a key to nowhere. They said he had ideas above his station. They said the building would swallow him if he kept staring at doors that weren't his. He kept moving, silent as always, but the key in his pocket felt heavier with every step, as if it knew what the others did not. Night returned like a curtain, falling quick and absolute. The city outside turned to a field of cold lights and deeper darks, and the tower resumed its truer life. Humming vents, dormant monitors, the quiet ticking of things that never fully sleep. He rode the service elevator alone. The metal walls reflected a thin ghost of him. 43 floors climbed past without ceremony. When the doors parted on the executive level, the air felt different, colder, thinner. He walked the corridor he knew better than any corridor in his life. The polish he had laid down made the floor look like water, black and still. The CEO's door waited at the far end, a pale rectangle of frost glass and gold. He could feel the key through his pocket, a cold outline pressing against his thigh. Something inside the walls ticked, slow and regular, as if measuring a heart that wasn't his. Halfway down the hall, he paused. There was a sound again, not the clean click from before. Softer, somewhere between a sigh and a whisper. It seemed to move along the corridor, passing from door to door, testing handles that should not be tested. He stood still, and the sound stood still with him, as though it had noticed his attention and pressed itself against the silence to listen back. He spoke his first word of the night to no one. "Hello." The corridor answered with the hum of electricity and the faintest hint of breathing. He took the key from his pocket. The brass looked older under the dim light, old enough to have opened doors before this company, before the tower itself. The tag shone with that single phrase he had read again and again. Authorized access. He reached the CEO's door. The handle was colder than it had been the night before. He tried to turn it without the key, a reflex born of curiosity and fear. It resisted with a steady strength that felt almost considerate. He lifted the key, expecting the wrong shape, expecting the wrong cut. Instead, the teeth slid into the lock with quiet intimacy, as if the lock had been bored to fit only that exact shape. One small twist. A sound like a breath held too long. The tumblers aligned, a chain of tiny decisions made in the darkness of brass and steel. The stairwell spiraled downward into a darkness that felt alive, breathing in time with his own heart. Each step was coated with dust that had not been disturbed for decades, and yet the air didn't smell of decay. It smelled of something sterile, electric, as if the walls themselves had been scrubbed clean by invisible hands. He counted 40 steps before the metal beneath his shoes turned to concrete. The key in his hand seemed to hum, a faint vibration against his skin, as though it recognized this place far better than he did. At the bottom of the stairwell was a narrow hallway illuminated by a pale, unnatural glow leaking from fixtures embedded in the ceiling. The light didn't flicker like normal bulbs. It pulsed gently, like a living organism guiding him deeper. The janitor followed it, one cautious step at a time, his breath shallow, every sound amplified by the claustrophobic air. The corridor ended at another door, plain, metallic, unmarked. No sign, no handle, only a black glass panel at chest height. He held the key close, expecting nothing, but the panel lit up the moment the brass reflected its dull light. Lines of text scrolled across the glass in a language that wasn't quite English. Then, without his touch, the door hissed open. Beyond it lay a room filled with cold blue light. Dozens of computer servers lined the walls, their faint hum blending into a mechanical chorus. Screens glowed with endless rows of data, faces, numbers, conversations. The janitor stepped closer, drawn forward like a moth to flame. He recognized the company logo stamped into the upper corner of each display, but the rest of the information made no sense. Files were labeled with dates that stretched back long before the company existed, long before he was born. He leaned toward one of the monitors. A list of employee names scrolled by, paired with timestamps and waveforms. Then he saw something that froze him entirely. His own name. Not janitor. Not custodian. His real name. The one he hadn't heard in years. The one no one in this building should have known. He clicked it. A recording began to play. A quiet voice. His voice, describing what he was doing at that very moment. the exact words, the same inflection, the same hesitation. He looked around the room for a microphone, for a camera. There was none. The voice continued, describing his confusion, his heartbeat, the way he turned toward the corner of the room to check the shadows. He stopped breathing, but the recording didn't. It described even that. Subject pauses breathing. Fear response elevated. He staggered backward, pulling the key from his pocket like it was a weapon. The screens flickered in response. Lines of code rearranged themselves. On the central monitor, new text appeared. Access reinstated. He didn't understand what that meant, but it triggered a memory, one he had buried under years of routine. He remembered the first time he'd seen this building under construction. He had been younger then, applying for any job that would have him. The man who hired him, tall, calm, strangely familiar, had looked him in the eye and said, "Welcome back." He had assumed it was a mistake. Now he wasn't so sure. The walls of the server room vibrated softly as if something behind them had awakened. The hum deepened. He turned toward the exit, but the door was gone. The seamless steel wall had closed itself, leaving no sign of an opening. Panic surged through him. He struck the surface with his fists, but the metal absorbed every blow with quiet indifference. Then, from somewhere behind the server racks, came the faintest sound, a slow, deliberate tapping, too measured to be random. He followed it, heart pounding, until he found a terminal different from the others. It was older, dust-covered, disconnected. The screen glowed weakly, showing a single line of text. "Do you remember your office?" He stared at it, confusion twisting in his gut. The words shifted. "Do you remember who gave you the key?" He tried to speak, but his throat was dry. He typed instead, "Who are you?" The cursor blinked once, twice, and then, "You are." He stepped back. The light from the monitors flared, casting his shadow long and distorted against the walls. For a moment it didn't move with him. He turned sharply and the shadow lagged half a second behind. When it caught up, he could swear its head tilted at a slightly different angle than his own. The air grew heavier. The hum became a low tone that resonated inside his chest. The lights dimmed, and faint whispers replaced the mechanical noise. They spoke in fragments, half-remembered sentences. They said his name again and again, until it no longer sounded like a name at all but a code, meant to awaken something inside him. He pressed his palms to his temples. "Stop," he whispered. But the sound only grew stronger. His thoughts blurred with the rhythm of the building. He realized he couldn't tell if the noise was outside or inside his head. And then silence. Total suffocating silence. The screens all changed at once. Each displayed the same image. A hallway, identical to the one above, with the janitor standing in it. The live feed showed him turning, panicked, as if the cameras were inside his own eyes. He watched himself reach into his pocket for the key. But on the feed, his hand wasn't shaking. His expression was calm. The version of him on the monitors looked up and smiled directly into the lens. He dropped the key. It hit the floor with a sound that echoed too loud for the small room. The screens went black. Then, a single message appeared across them all. "Welcome back, Director." The hum returned, louder now, almost joyous. He stood in the blue glow, surrounded by evidence of a life he couldn't remember. A voice, his own, spoke from somewhere deep within the walls. "You've kept it clean for long enough. It's time to open the rest." He stared into the darkness, trembling, realizing that the building didn't just belong to someone else. It belonged to him. Or perhaps he belonged to it. And somewhere far above, in the empty CEO's office, the golden light flickered back to life. The hum in the room shifted. No longer a single tone, but a harmony of layered whispers rising through the vents and wires. The janitor, if he was still that, stood surrounded by the glow of the screens, feeling the air change around him. The voice that had spoken through the machines was gone, but its echo remained, woven into the pulse of the servers. He reached for the key where it lay on the floor. The brass was hot, as if it had absorbed the heartbeat of the building. He lifted it, and for a moment he saw a reflection in its surface. Not his face, but another's, older and colder, wearing a faint smile of recognition. He understood then that the voice had not been calling him by mistake. It had been calling him back. The building did not keep secrets. It was the secret, a living archive built from every thought and memory of those who had worked here. The files he had seen were not surveillance logs. They were lives, reconstructed and stored like data. And his file, his was the first. He staggered to the nearest server tower and pressed his palm against the casing. The metal throbbed beneath his skin. Flashes of memory erupted behind his eyes. Blueprints, meetings, contracts, all buried under the weight of forgotten years. He remembered signing papers with his own name, designing a system meant to observe, predict, and eventually control. The corporation had been his creation. He had built it to outlive himself. The janitor's job had been the final stage of that plan. The observer, the caretaker, the sleeper left behind to keep the machine alive. He had not been hired 17 years ago. He had been reactivated. The truth flooded him like ice water. He saw himself on the day he first walked into the tower, younger but somehow the same. The man who had greeted him, tall, calm, familiar, had been his own reflection on the mirrored surface of the lobby doors. "Welcome back," it had said, and he had mistaken the greeting for politeness. He stumbled backward, dizzy, every monitor now flashing the same message. Initiating protocol echo. The floor vibrated as new systems awoke beneath him. Machinery that had been sleeping since before he forgot who he was. He tried to shut it off, to find a switch or a cable, but there was none. The machine didn't need power. It drew energy from him. A voice rose from the intercom. Calm, precise, impossibly familiar. "Director, your return is confirmed. Awaiting final authorization." He shouted at the ceiling. "I am not the director. I clean the floors. I fix the lights." His words bounced uselessly against the walls. The speakers crackled. "Correction. You designed the floors. You lit the halls. You wrote every word that I speak." He felt the world tilt beneath him. His knees hit the ground. He tried to remember the years before the building, before the key, before the laughter of people who never saw him. There was nothing. The machine had erased everything that didn't serve its purpose. It had built an identity small enough to hide the truth. The light in the room turned from blue to gold, the same gold that had glowed beneath the CEO's door. The sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor behind him. Slow, steady, human. He turned, expecting a security guard, a trick of the system. But what entered the room was himself, or rather, the version of him that still belonged to the building, the one from the screens. Dressed in a suit, calm, expressionless, the janitor stared. The others smiled faintly. "You've done well," the suited figure said. "You've kept it clean. You've kept it hidden. But we can't stay asleep forever." He wanted to run, but his body refused. The suited man stepped closer. "You left the system because you feared what it would become. You thought you could forget. But forgetting doesn't erase creation. It only delays it." He reached out a hand. "Come back. Finish what you began." The janitor shook his head, backing into the hum of the machines. "No, I'm not you." The other's smile widened. "You never stopped being me." For a heartbeat, the room filled with silence so deep it erased the concept of sound. The key in his hand began to vibrate violently. The servers flared to life, beams of golden light shooting across the walls. The two men stood face to face. The same heartbeat, the same breath. One raised the key. The other extended his hand. "I won't let this continue," the janitor whispered. "Not again." He drove the key into the nearest console. Sparks erupted. The machine screamed, a digital shriek through the floor and walls. The lights burst, one after another, until only the monitor's dying glow remained. The suited figure reached out, trying to stop him, but his form wavered like a reflection on disturbed water. The tower above trembled. Somewhere high above, glass shattered. He felt the ground shift, the hum falter, the heartbeat of the building stutter for the first time in decades. He fell to his knees, clutching the remains of the key, half melted, still pulsing faintly with golden light. The suited version of himself flickered once more, then dissolved into static and vanished. The voice from the speakers stuttered, glitching between words and silence. Director, command, incomplete. Then only a single line remained, whispered like a dying breath, access denied. The golden glow faded. The servers dimmed. The hum died completely. He sat in the sudden stillness, surrounded by the carcass of a machine that had once called itself a god. The floor beneath him was warm, as if something beneath the surface still lived. He closed his eyes and whispered into the quiet, "It's over." But even as he said it, he wasn't sure if he believed it. Above him, the building groaned. Somewhere in that deep mechanical sigh, there was the faint echo of a heartbeat, slow and patient, waiting for the right moment to begin again. The janitor, no, the man who had once been the director, stood. The light from the last surviving monitor reflected in his eyes. The screen showed a single message. Reconstruction, 0% complete. He turned toward the stairwell, the key fragment clenched in his hand. The corridor above glimmered faintly, as though dawn were breaking through the cracks. He didn't know if he had destroyed it or merely awakened it. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. The building was not finished with him yet. The morning came without warning, seeping through the cracks of the tower like a pale ghost. The city outside still slept, unaware of what had awakened in its tallest monument. Dust hung in the air, golden and slow, falling through faint beams of early light that pierced the shattered glass high above. The janitor stood in the ruins of the server room, the hum of machines replaced by silence so thick it seemed to absorb sound itself. He had not moved for hours. The key fragment rested in his palm, cold again, lifeless, just a piece of brass with no more power than memory. He climbed the stairwell slowly. Each step felt heavier, as if gravity had deepened overnight. The lights that once pulsed from the walls were gone, leaving only the dim glow of sunrise pushing through the emergency windows. The air smelled faintly of ozone and burned metal. Somewhere deep within the structure, a generator sputtered once, coughed, and died. He realized that for the first time in 17 years, the tower was truly silent. When he emerged onto the executive floor, it looked unchanged, perfect, polished, serene, as if the chaos beneath had been a dream. The CEO's office door stood open, revealing a room that should not have existed in that state. The furniture was clean, the floor spotless, the gold handle gleaming as though freshly polished. On the desk lay a single envelope, aged at the edges, sealed with black wax. His name written on it in a hand that was his own. He hesitated, then broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, its writing precise, mechanical, yet strangely human. It read, "If you are reading this, the system has completed its cycle. You did not destroy it. You fulfilled it. Memory requires renewal. The machine cannot exist without a witness, and you are the last one left. Keep it clean, keep it alive. Access will return." His hand trembled. The page smelled faintly of dust and static. He looked around the office, searching for signs of life. On the wall behind the desk hung a large mirror framed in black steel. He approached, expecting the suited version of himself. What stared back was only him. Older, weary, but unmistakably real. Yet as he stared deeper, a flicker crossed his image, like a skipped frame in a video file. For an instant, the mirror showed the room alive again, the director standing tall. Then it was gone. He touched the glass. It was warm. The building groaned, subtle, stretching after a long sleep. The lights in the hallway flickered once. The monitor on the far wall flashed for a second. A single phrase appeared before fading into black. Reconstruction. 1%. He closed his eyes. Part of him wanted to scream, to destroy what remained, to walk out and never look back. But another part, the deeper one, the part that had guided his hands through years of silent cleaning, felt calm. The machine was not his enemy. It was his reflection, his creation, his punishment. It would not die because it was never truly alive. It was the echo of human ambition, forgotten and now reborn. He left the CEO's office and walked the empty hallways, footsteps soft against the polished floor. The morning sun reached through the high windows, touching the walls with a weak but honest light. Dust sparkled like the remnants of a faded miracle. Down below, the streets began to stir with life. None of them knew that the building above their heads had whispered, had dreamed, had almost remembered itself. At the elevator, he paused. The control panel blinked once, dimly alive. He pressed the button for the ground floor. The doors opened without sound, welcoming him back as though nothing had changed. As the elevator descended, he caught his reflection again in the brushed metal walls. For a moment there were two of him, one in the uniform of a janitor, the other in a dark gray suit, watching with patient eyes. The suited version smiled faintly. Then the lights flickered, and the reflection was gone. When the doors opened, the lobby looked as it always had. Clean, silent, waiting. The morning guard nodded at him, unaware that anything had happened during the night. The janitor nodded back, the faintest trace of a smile crossing his face. He stepped out into the daylight. The city noise washed over him like something unfamiliar and new. Behind him, the tower stood tall, its mirrored walls catching the first full light of day. For a moment, the reflection shimmered, bending the skyline into impossible shapes. High above, one office window glowed faintly gold, though no light should have been on at that hour. He turned once to look back. The key fragment glimmered in his palm before fading to dull brass. He slipped it into his pocket and walked away. The building watched him go, and somewhere deep within its walls, far below the forgotten server room, a soft mechanical click echoed. Once, twice, then again, steady and deliberate. The pulse returned. Some stories end when the sun rises, but this one still waits in the dark.